Right now, an unmanned plane like this one is circling the skies of Afghanistan, giving commanders a view of the battlefield, tracking people, carrying weapons capable of killing without warning. Regardless of the number of troops on the ground, the use of unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs as they are called, is expected to continue to grow. Right now, the U.S. military has almost 6,500 UAVs, ranging in size from around 2 kilos to just under 5,000. The Pentagon is expected to buy almost 700 more next year at a cost of more than $1 billion.
It can fly routinely 12 to 22-hour long missions without having to come off target and go refuel and then get back on target. And then not only the deadly persistence, but it can do it covertly.
But there are grave concerns about the number of civilians being killed by UAVs, so much so that the top commander in Afghanistan has severely limited the use of airstrikes.
Because of the technology, we have these greater expectations that somehow we should be able to do war in a clean manner, because we're not going into harm's way, so of course it should also be clean on the other side. But that's not the reality of it.
The use of UAVs has been especially controversial in Pakistan, where the CIA is believed to run its own UAV program. A report from the New America Foundation says since 2006, these kinds of attacks have killed between 750 and 1,000 people in Pakistan, estimating that almost a third were civilians. U.S. officials say 20 were al-Qaeda and Taliban leaders, which has raised the concern of investigators from the United Nations.
The onus is really on the government of the United States to reveal more about the ways in which it makes sure that arbitrary executions, extrajudicial executions, are not in fact being carried out through the use of these weapons.
The Obama administration says the UN doesn't get a say about killings during an armed conflict. And the pace of bombings from unmanned planes continues to increase. In his first year in office, President Barack Obama has approved 43 strikes into Pakistan. That's more than all of the strikes conducted in the last 3 years of the Bush administration, according to one study. Peter Singer, who wrote a book on the subject, says 44 nations are now in a race to build the next best airborne robot, and he believes it will change the way we all look at conflict.
Where the nation can be at war, but actually the nation really isn't at war. And it's kind of worrisome because if the public isn't engaged in its wars, if it outsources its wars, I think often bad decisions are made because people don't weigh wars the same way if they view it as costless.
A new calculation to the cost of war, but only for some. Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera, Washington.
James Dedarian joins us now. He's a professor at Brown University, an expert in new technology being used to wage war. Professor, thank you for joining us. Isn't the point about using such advanced technology, though, that it will minimize civilian casualties because of the extra precision afforded the military?
That's definitely the expectation. The idea of precision munitions, smart weapons, low cost to your own side has been the driving force behind the proliferation of drones over the last several years.
So what's going so wrong?
Well, two things. One, the ethical considerations that you've covered about fighting war at a distance. The idea that it looks too much like a Nintendo game, you see everything on a screen, removes human cost. But the other element is that for every al-Qaeda operative that you take out with one of these weapons, and I'm talking about now drones that have Hellfire missiles, not the drones simply for surveillance, you probably end up recruiting 15 more. There's a recent case of a kidnapped New York Times correspondent where a missile strike from a drone hit nearby, and not only did it lead to new recruitments, but also they went and started looking for spies and killing innocent people, thinking that they are aiding in the targeting.
But why is the civilian toll so high?
Well, it isn't a precision munition, and it's also the case probably that Taliban, al-Qaeda are quite aware that there'll be more reluctance to strike if they are in an area where there are civilians, or even having civilians in the cars by which they travel. So on both sides, I think there's a game going on of trying to reduce the likelihood of a strike and the likelihood of collateral damage.
I mean, that's interesting, though, because, I mean, the argument of those advocating a counter-terrorism strategy as opposed to a counter-insurgency strategy in Washington is you can reduce the number of personnel on the ground and rely more on technology, but it would seem then these drones aren't terribly well suited to this sort of insurgency.
That's right. There's probably a war going on within the military about this, with the Army and Marines, the guys boots on the ground, see it one way, while the Air Force, which is largely in control of the Hellfire strikes, the CIA as well, see it as an opportunity to be in the game, to have a say in the strategy of the war. So you never play down too much of the inter-service as well as the civilian versus military views about what's the best strategy in Afghanistan.
What about the legality of all this?
It's murky. The idea, particularly if you're flying drones over another sovereign country, such as Pakistan, whether or not this is equivalent to interference, violating sovereignty. There's all kinds of agreements, some of them open, some of them secret, which makes it very difficult to lay a clear legal line on this issue.
Professor, thank you very much.
You're most welcome.